Welcome, everybody. I'm Rita McGrath, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined this week by Erich Joachimsthaler. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly.
You do.
My parents were German, so I have a little bit of an advantage.
I suspected it, Rita.
Günther was my maiden name.
Yeah, Rita Günther.
Günther Dorothea. So that was my original maiden name. So if you're new to this, welcome. We are recording this, so don't say anything that you would not want to see repeated on the pages of your friendly local newspaper. And the recording is usually available 5 to 7 days after the session. As a general rule, if you want to interact with us, the chat's the best way to do that. I find it hard to do this and moderate like raised hands and stuff. So just put your questions in the chat. We'll try to get to them as we go through the conversation. If we don't get to them live, we'll follow up afterwards with any questions or further requests that you might have. So without further ado, welcome, Erich.
Hello, Rita.
Hello. So I'll give the 30,000-foot overview of the background, and you can go from there. So Erich is the CEO of a marketing branding company called Vivaldi, and has been on the faculty of numerous universities, has written a bunch of books and over 100 articles, and a very sought after speaker. I'm very honored to be having him on this program so that we can spend some time hearing about his new book, which is The Interaction Field. You can see I've got little notes.
You skipped the earlier chapters. You went straight to...
No, I didn't skip them. My first little note is page 17 with the picture.
There we go.
Have you explain?
There we go.
The picture of the model, which I think is powerful. But before we get to that, which is, of course, where we want to go. But I'd love you to just tell us a little bit about your journey. And you've got a couple of really well-regarded previous books, one on brand leadership, and another one which I've always really liked called Hidden in Plain Sight.
Yeah.
So maybe tell us some of the sort of how you came to those books and what they're about.
Yeah. And in fact, there is a sort of a rhyme and reason for everything when you look backwards. It's back then I didn't think it evolves like this, the journey. But back then, in the early 90s, I got fascinated by this idea that the only 10 or 15% of the intangible asset value of a firm is of the total value of a firm. 15% is intangible, and everything was tangible. So brand reputation was one area, and I bet at the time there was a discussion in the strategy literature that companies evolve, that the intangible asset value will grow. If you look today, you see just the opposite. Today you have on an average Fortune 500 company, 85% is actually intangible and 15% is tangible. You call them asset light, right? And back then in the early 90s, I figured that I can't be a strategy, can discuss strategy. But from my vantage point of marketing, I thought that a brand is really a way to capture that growing intangible asset value. And in order to do that, you can't look at it from a marketing and a branding and a design perspective with a logo and a name and symbols. You need to look at a strategic perspective. How do you, and that's what my thought was. In the 90s, I spent a lot of time building models, basically applying strategy models to think through branding problems. And that became that first book, Brand Leadership. And brand leadership was this way of saying, look, it's not a brand manager's job. It's a CEO job. It's a C-level job to manage the brand. It's your second most important intangible asset value after people, and that led to and what in 2000 and so forth. Everybody says, oh yeah, we can build brands. We need advertising. More advertising. And I felt like no. That's not the point. I created this with David Archer from Berkeley. I created the identity-driven approach. That means what you stand for, your culture, your belief. That's what you need to express, not a message to consumers. And I felt like, and it's your product, it's your portfolio. And so back in then I came to this idea that we really must think of this not just as a communications exercise, but it's about innovation and driving new innovation that are consumer driven. And that became that book, Hidden in Plain Sight. And similar to some of the theses that you have, Rita, I said to myself that the more successful you are in a business, the more you look from the inside out, the more you look at opportunities for growth from your past experiences, from your existing assets, your people, your factories, and that constrains you. You cannot see the biggest opportunities in plain sight. They're almost hidden for you, and you need to figure out how to step outside of that, and actually see, if I were to use your point in the last book, the inflection points. And so the new book here in the action field sort of is, to me, that it almost like fits perfectly together in hindsight, where I said, again, there is something massively changing in the market, and we need to see how value is created now in this new world in the last years, and that's what I was describing in the new book.
So let me go back to the traditional models in strategy, because as you know, one of the things I've been working on very hard is what I call the new strategy playbook, that we really, a lot of that stuff just doesn't work anymore. And I think you've raised a couple of those concepts. And one of the more time-honored ones is this notion of a value chain that begins here, and then you have raw materials, and then you have an input process, and then you have some kind of manufacturing process, and then you have this conversion into a product, and then you've got sales and marketing and outreach. And it's all this sort of super orderly chain. And then underlying it are logistics and the sort of corporate-wide functions. And not that it's a bad framework. And in an asset-intensive, pretty stable market where your industry boundaries are relatively clear. I think it's, I used to teach it in my MBA courses. But I think looking at the world that way, in a world which is asset light, where knowledge and communication are more the currency of the realm than a particular object or thing, I think it can really be very misleading. So I think one of the things I'm very intrigued at your interaction field idea is you've actually gone beyond ecosystems even. And so maybe tell us that journey. Like, how do you go from a value chain centric version of the world to an ecosystem? And now you've gone way beyond ecosystems even.
So if you look at the value chain idea, the strategy and competitive advantage rests on differences in the activities. And primarily differences activities along the value chain in some ways. You get a BMW from Munich because it's the ultimate driving machine. The marketing people have differentiated through branding, make us Americans believe, if you will, that this is not like a Mercedes. The ultimate driving machine is BMW. And the R&D people have put technology in there. And we know that technology is superior in a BMW than a Mercedes, which it isn't, but we all believe so. An Audi. And that value.
So, come on, you're betraying your roots here.
That's true. I love all three companies, actually, Audi, Mercedes, BMW. If I only could afford the garage here in New York, it's the car is not the problem. It's the garage that is so expensive. But when you think about that kind of mindset works when you compete with Mercedes, BMW, and Audi, the 3 or 4 or 5, and you can sort of figure out the difference in the activities, and you can also brand those when you're just looking at a very relatively small set, and that is a good thing to do. But now with so many companies out there that also offer these kind of cars, and the choice isn't really anymore between a BMW Mercedes. You say, like, how about a BMW Mercedes, or maybe I buy a Land Rover, let's say. So that the consumers look no longer just within a defined set of 2-3 competitors. The competing on differences and creating an advantage is simply, in this day and age, incredibly difficult. And so I thought, it's sort of, how do you create competitive advantage? Now, it's good if you can go through a value chain analysis and you come up with differences, and that's always good to have. But value isn't really created no longer through differences. And what I found, and this got me so excited, in 2014, there were these two economists called Jean in Toulouse, University of Toulouse. Jean Roger is one of them. And the two economists got a Nobel Prize for a paper that they wrote 10 years before. I would have never been able to read, even though I have an undergraduate in economics from the University of Frankfurt. But it triggered my thought. They talked about two-sided marketplaces. Mm-hmm. And the idea here is that the value is no longer created in the value chain through becoming different or creating differences or branding differences along the value chain. The value is created by capturing interactions and connections in several sides of a market. And I looked at what was for me sort of interesting is what is really the biggest, if 20, 30 years ago, the biggest trend was from tangible to intangible assets as part of the firm. The biggest change that we talk about today is, you can talk about this technology and that, you can talk about cloud, you can talk about AI, you can talk about ML, you can talk about social media, you can talk about mobile phones, but all of these do one thing. They create some hyper connectivity of everything, of people, of things, of companies, globally, anywhere. And what I saw in that paper, that Nobel Prize winning paper, and 6 years ago, is that value creation is shifting from the traditional pipeline model to creating these platforms, ecosystems, and what I call interaction fields. And the more interaction, I call it velocity, you create, the more you drive entirely new value, not supply side values, but demand side values, network effects, viral effects, learning effects. And it is actually those effects that actually companies really create now new values for, and sort of makes great stuff happening.
It's fascinating. So just for those that aren't familiar with the term, let's just focus on network effects for a minute. So the network effect refers to the fact that, I've got this pen, or I've got an even fancier Apple pen. Mm-hmm. But the fact that I own one doesn't mean it's more valuable to you, right?
Yeah.
Whereas with the interaction field companies that you're talking about, the number of users, the number of interactions, as that increases, your value of what you're offering.
Yeah. And it's hard to make the example with a pen unless the pen is connected in some ways,
Well, I guess you can make the case that the Apple Pencil is sort of connected.
That's right. That's good. But when I'm here living on the Upper West Side here here in mid 75th and Broadway in New York, and we have a flat, two flat, and there's some space available. When I as the owner of this apartment put that spare room that we have available in our apartment, put this on Airbnb and make this available to travelers to New York City. Now, and if everybody else does it too, mine is it's more modest, but maybe somebody has a more fancy flat or something. The value that is that's a network effect. Namely, Airbnb doesn't create the value. It's I actually as a homeowner create the value. And so the more people like me offer their flat or their spare rooms to travelers, the more value is created on the Airbnb platform or ecosystem or network, if you will. So what's sort of interesting is in the old days, let's say the value chain days, value was created inside the firm. What Mercedes or BMW did in their factories and in their marketing departments and in their supply chain, along the supply chain. But now the value is not created inside the firm. It is not inside Airbnb. It is created actually by consumers. I am but even if I have a good travel somewhere, I go to Los Angeles over Thanksgiving to visit my daughter. I rent an Airbnb next to where she lives. Afterwards, I rate that Airbnb location. So I contribute as a consumer to the Airbnb sort of like value of the business. In the same way, I contribute as a homeowner by listing my place. So the value, and why does it create value? Because Airbnb stands for variety. You can rent a barge in London or a castle in France, and or a little flat here in my apartment. And it's so it's variety, it's choice that Airbnb stands for. It's also sometimes more accessible price points. It's also a different value proposition. It's more social. You know, you're meeting somebody. You're not an incognito sort of guest in a hotel. So there's new values created here that actually is created not inside Airbnb by everybody involved in what I call an interaction field.
Which is fascinating, right? And if you think of the traditional competitors, and an example I use quite often is Gillette in shaving, right?
Yeah.
And very traditional value chain idea, right? We have research, better products, armies of distributors, at mass market advertising.
4 blades, 5 blades. there were never 6 blades, but
27. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you know, so along come these interaction field companies, which are basically leveraging very inexpensive new technologies to create these connections and flows of information. Which have just been very difficult for incumbents to do it. But one of the examples you used in the book, which I really like, and just transitioning now to what an interaction field is and how do you build one, but you use the example of John Deere.
Yeah.
Which is a very traditional company.
Absolutely.
The original guy, right, was a guy who...
John Deere.
He had horse-drawn plows or something. That was where he started his business. Mm-hmm. But you describe them as an interaction field company.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very interesting because John Deere is a $30 billion company. John Deere, I mean, everybody, there are farmers, there are websites you can go on to. They will tell you that John Deere is like off the charts. You know, if you're a real farmer, you ride on a John Deere. It's sort of like, so if you don't have a John Deere, you're not a farmer in some ways.
And it has cup holders. It has cup holders.
Yeah, it has cup. Oh, you have no idea. Today, a John Deere, the 9T is it called, is like an $800,000 thing. You can buy 3 Rolls Royces. It has several screens inside. You can watch Netflix and you can watch 2 programs at the same time while you mow down, while you lumber down the field at 7 miles per hour. Now, so it's technologically, digitally a marvel, this machine. And it sets you back quite heavily if you're a farmer. You can imagine farms are typically not very large, and an $800,000 machine on the field is quite a racket, let's say. But it's worth the money. I know from things. But so that's good, and there are other good solutions to that. Other competitors that also have very good solutions. John Deere is technologically really advanced. But what I find interesting, and this is sort of like where this whole idea goes. When you think of tractors, you think about my tractor versus your tractor. I'm selling my better tractor, my service contracts to over my dealers versus somebody else. That's the traditional game. The game that John Deere also plays, which I wanted to describe in the book, is where John Deere uses various mechanisms, sensors on the John Deere tractor. They can also be distributed otherwise to measure ultimately at the square foot, but ultimately at the square inch level, the condition of the field of thousands and thousands of farmers. Farmers decide that we share the data, the daily interaction, the minute interaction of what is the soil condition, how the health of the plant, how much water is irrigated. Some farmers, or many farmers now, even share, it's called the John Deere Open Platform, the John Deere farm profitability information. So the entire operations is managed. Now, the traditional mindset would be, from a traditional company would be, oh, I got all this data from the farmers. Now we can really sell more tractors, right? That would be the mindset of the traditional firm. But John Deere is different, Rita. What John Deere says is, what if we take those data and we augment them data with weather data. We work actually with other participants in the interaction field, like a crop company, who can tell me what kind of crop, what works with what kind of soil condition. That what if we also work with a fertilizer company like Syngenta or Dow Crop Sciences, and let's not just put fertilizers by the pound on the field around the plant, which is really good for growing the plant, but also destroys the land for further harvesting, if you will, and cultivation. So what if we all work together? Not only people like a crop company that also makes money, or farmers, but how about academics who actually research the science of agriculture? How about investors? How about ag tech companies that can create software solutions? And they all work off this amazing what I call a nucleus of data and interactions that John Deere enables. And that is sort of an emerging in the action field. Oh, even the food administration, the agricultural, the government can get involved, because we know that farms need to be subsidized. And you know what sort of the beautiful thing of this is? If you more precisely farm, if you more precisely run down the John Deere tractor, down the line, down your field, the maximum productivity improvement is about 10%, because it goes from 3,579 kilo per hectare of cereals, 10% of that. Now, if you actually create that in the action field, you can double the average farm productivity, and you actually make farms profitable in the US. And it's not only that you make the farms profitable, but you know all that there is a growing population of about from 7.5 billion to 9 billion and so forth in the world. The idea that the thing is by 2050 or even more, the idea is if American farms are productive, they're relatively very highly productive already. But if American farms alone could double the productivity of the farms, they also could solve for all the food needs, healthy food for the entire world. It is such an impact. So the power, that's why I put it in the early chapters. I said, this is not about selling tractors. This is not about helping one farmer. It is about farmers helping other farmers, helping the entire agricultural system to work a lot more effective. It's actually solving world hunger. So I'm a bit carried away with my thoughts, but I stop here better.
But that's mind blowing,
Yeah.
because so many of our problems really are systemic problems. So one question that's come in on the chat is, do you think all this interactivity is creating more rapidity in the pace of competition?
Repetitivity?
Just more competitive intensity, more players coming in.
Yeah.
So I think you could look at it either way, right? You could say, yes, on the one hand, all these interactions are creating that. But on the other hand, it makes it, once you've got the system built, it's harder to dislodge it.
Yeah, I think that we are in a transition, and especially the pandemic sort of has told us that and there are some systems, some of that to that question. Think of the two ecosystems. It is either the Apple or the Android system, the iOS and the Android. These are two ecosystems. They are competing with each other. It's either you're whatever. I think that's sort of like a path toward an interaction field. When you work, and I think it's just another form of competition. Right now, it's been writing about ecosystem competition. And I agree with the viewer that this is just another intensified version of competition. But that is really the problem that strategists like Rita I'm, I'm pushing your buttons. That strategists love, because strategists typically are grown up in the world of competition. And then there's another form of competition and another form of competition, and then there, from a product competition, there's an ecosystem competition now. But the way I think about it is that I think of it actually in the opposite way. Everything connects, like in the farm is a good example. And if we really want to solve for the lack of product, the lack of profitability of farmers, if you really want to help farmers, it isn't about one ecosystem and another ecosystem selling more stuff to the farmer. It's really figuring out how do we orchestrate a system of interactions so that, and this is what it's proven it works, that you're really solving the problems of the farm. 40% of the water that is supposed to reach the plant never reaches the plant. Water is one of the scarcest resources we have. There is an enormous amount of waste the industry have, let alone the societal problem. The gas emissions is huge. It's only after the automobile, the farms is the biggest one. But 40% of the whole world is actually farming, 40%, and they're all running incredibly inefficient. So I think that rather than thinking of competition, I don't think of it as repetitive. I don't think of it, these interactions, as just another form of competition. I think of it as a new form of collaboration, participation, and interaction. And that can solve not only better productivity for the farms, but also solving some of those intractable problems in the industry and for us as a society, greenhouse effects.
That's
gas
very
effects.
inspiring. So let's talk a little bit about the building blocks, the framework, because I think it's hard for people to see just how different this is and what they've heard about ecosystems or platforms or two-sided. So you talk about having a nucleus, which is some kind of producer, some kind of consumer relationship. And that's sort of where it starts. Then there's an ecosystem wrapped around it. And then you have what you call market makers. And that's where I think you make the transition from having an ecosystem to this broader idea. And I'll just hold up the picture of what you got in the book about the John Deere.
There we go. Yes, that's a satellite system of
right. This is my very sophisticated visual display methodology. But walk us through how you go. Like let's just say I'm a I don't know, pharmaceutical company, mid-range, smallish, not one of the majors, but mid-range, and I want to build this operating model that is deeply embedded in some kind of interaction field. How do I make that happen?
I in the book I address healthcare. And I work with Pfizer in the past on these kind of models. And one of the biggest drugs areas of Pfizer, let's say, is actually cancer drugs. Is Avastin, competes with Roche and others. Now, here's what has happened in the field. I know what the whole problem with the pharmaceutical business is. You have a blockbuster drug, and then you have pharmaceutical detailed salespeople that go in 15-minute intervals to the doctors and shake hands and says, you should use Avastin over this other one over there, right? And the doctor says, you push my button so much, okay, I'm trying with Avastin this time and things like that. It's sort of like a push marketing model. But that's not how you really solve cancer. Here is how you can really, how Pfizer also works. And I think this is where and I described it in the book. There is a small company, 24-year-old, two guys, 24 years old, Ted Turner and
Iron Health.
You know them, Flatiron Health. Oh, you know them. Yes, of course.
I wrote about them in my book.
Oh, there we go.
I should put in a plug for my alma mater, graduates of the Wharton Entrepreneurship.
That's right, they are.
As am I.
But at the age of 24 years, as you know, there was a personal reason why they have done it. One of them had a nephew who was diagnosed with leukemia, a sort of a form of blood cancer. And they said, like, how can we help in solving cancer issues. And what they did is they have convinced hospitals, cancer hospitals, now thousands of them, and millions of patients that are treated by cancer every year, and doctors, and they have convinced them that an abstractor, or an abstractor is a person that walks behind the doctor when the doctor does a diagnosis in the hospital room, and writes down everything a doctor mumbles, everything the doctor scribbles, and he talks to the nurse, and he talks to the resident intern, and he talks to the other surgical team, let's say, or the cancer treatment team. And on all these data, these rich, they call them unstructured data, are captured by this abstractor. They're digitized, and they are on a daily basis the perfect diagnosis that's taking place. These gentlemen took this typical platform, digital ecosystem, cloud solution, aggregate those data across the hospitals, across the doctors, and now work together with Pfizer and with Roche and other cancer companies, their cancer drug companies, other therapies to treat cancers like health, wellness and eating habits and things like that. And they look at the data and says, how do we solve for cancer? And what has happened is now Pfizer, instead of pushing just drugs to the doctors, and you know how the problem you see when you get that, you get diagnosed. 18 million Americans get diagnosed every year. You get diagnosed, you say like, look, doctor, I die. When can I get on the therapy? He says like, look, I put you on the therapy as soon as I can. I put you on the therapy within a few weeks. You're very nervous about it. You get on Avastin or any other drug. 3 months later, you're done, and you're like a vegetable. You lose your hair, you whatever, all those, you lose your weight, and things like that. So now they have found that sometimes through this sharing of the data of treatment, that data that never existed before, even in electronic health record, that now actually competitors like Pfizer works closely together with Roche and several other companies and says, for some types of cancer or for some type of people with a physical condition or a genome sort of DNA type a body, let's say, or sort of makeup, we don't actually need Avastin or any drug, or we need a combination of drugs. And now here's the interaction field. The department of the drug, FDA, has come into play and says, wow, instead of just waiting to approve for many years to come a particular drug for a particular cancer condition, let's say, we can actually, based on this data and these interactions that have been collected, we can actually approve the drugs earlier for some conditions than we would ever have. If you know the problem with that problem in the industry is that a drug sometimes takes 18 years until it is approved for another condition. It may be approved for mammal cancer and until it's for colon cancer, it takes years. So a lot of people die in the process that just don't get it in time. You have an 18-month survival rate with most of the cancers. So what happens is now drugs are early made available. Sometimes no drugs at all. Some other ways you can live with the condition. So Pfizer works now in a very different way. Of course, there is a blockbuster pipeline, but there is also this collaboration, participation in an interaction field where they compete, they collaborate with competitors, and they collaborate with patients that give extremely sensitive, privacy governed information. And this, you know what? These patients and these doctors are glad to give those data. They are not afraid to give their health data away because it's beneficial. So the effect of this work has been that drugs are approved earlier, which has saved significant lives for patients. And doctors now learn from other doctors around the country and says, this has worked for me. This is the right combination drug. So it's a beautiful example of how a company like Pfizer is still operating the value chain, the pipeline business for good reasons, but also sees the power of an interaction field company.
How do you make the distinction between who profits from this? Like, because that's always the big question about these systemic problems. How do you figure out who is
Yeah,
incented to participate? So why does John Deere want to do this? Why would Pfizer want to do this?
yeah,
Because our traditional notion of capturing value,
yeah,
right? It's all about scarcity. It's all about
yes,
erecting barriers. It's all about I have this
yes,
unique thing and you're going to pay more
yeah.
for it. But you're talking about something completely different.
Yeah, and you know what the experience now is over the years is that that idea, that's also sort of a strategy concept. There's a win-lose, somebody wins, somebody lose. It's my market share versus your market share. There are only so many tractors farmers can buy. If I don't sell my tractor, then I lose, the other wins. That mindset is wrong. And what people have realized is that if you write and that goes to the specifics of building an interaction field company, if you write the governance rules, the policies, the rules of engagement, if you write them properly, and that's a real science in itself, who is benefiting from that, you can and you realize where shared value is created, who creates value, and then distribute and write the governance rules properly. Then you realize that actually if the fertilizer company sells less pounds to the farmer, they're losing in selling fertilizers, but overall they're actually winning because more farmers actually are going on the system, and it becomes a much more efficient play. That you don't need more salespeople to push more appointment with farmers. You don't need as many pharmaceutical detail salespeople that push 15-minute intervals drugs to things. So the net effect to Rita, to your point, is that actually the market is actually growing for everyone, because the market isn't just selling a product anymore. The market is, we are solving for cancer. Now this becomes a much bigger thing for Pfizer than just, okay, we are a drug company and we have this blockbuster drugs that we sell to doctors. So I think that's sort of the recognition. Actually, the market grows for everyone, so everybody benefits at the end. But it requires designing that interaction field properly. What interactions create value, what is the architecture, who participates, do you have an open system versus a closed system, and what are the rules of governance of engagement.
So you talk about the importance, and I think this is related, of gravitational pull.
Yeah.
And gravitational pull rather, and super fluid markets.
Yes.
So, one of the reasons that I've observed ecosystems don't take off.
Yes.
And healthcare would be a good example of this, right? There have been many, many, many players, from Microsoft to Google to whoever, who've tried to say, we're going to be the architects of the ecosystem. And
Yes.
to a complete disaster. I mean, it hasn't come up at all. And where I think Flatiron Health has done a really interesting job is they didn't start by trying to boil the ocean. They said, we're going to focus on specifically cancer, specifically oncologists, with a particular focus on juvenile conditions.
Yes.
And then they spread out from there. But they really started fairly narrowly, if memory serves me.
Yeah.
So who gets to do this? Like, who gets to design the architecture? What are the necessary ingredients when you're thinking about? So, you're starting without, right? You're starting like, I make a widget and I've read this book. I'm totally inspired. I want to get to be part of an interaction field. There's me and my buddy and 3 partners and a guy that does deliveries. Where do I go from there?
Yeah. Well, I think of there are 4 steps that you need to go through. But the first one we've sort of alluded to a number of times now, and the first one is framing. And it's obviously it's a well-known concept in marketing. But John Deere, when John Deere was around, the real John Deere, and for many generations, he would say, as long as it is green and yellow and it has my name on it, it's going to be the best tractor a farmer can ever buy. And the mindset was, we are the best tractor company, $30 billion in Moline, Illinois, and makes me proud. And there was a recognition at John Deere where they say, our job is not to create better tractors. Our job is to serve, they call it, serve those close to the land. Now, that is an interesting thought. That means serving those close to the land means, okay, in KPIs, let's say, key performance indicators, that means we need to make farms profitable. I think we need to help farmers. We need to get productivity in the field and profitability of the farm per acre, let's say. Then we need, and who else serves close to the land? Those people that supply, namely the fertilizer companies and the crop companies and everybody else who piles onto the farmer and sells stuff to the farmer. So the mindset here shifts. I think that's the first thing. How do you frame your opportunity? Is your business of selling more tractors, or is your business of improving the farm productivity or profitability of the farm, or even larger questions of solving some industry problems? So, and you know what I think, and I work with David Collis, a good colleague of yours. We always think that there needs to be a hierarchy of those objectives. You know, that you need to figure out where do you set your priorities. So that's step one. The second step is to design that interaction field, and everybody knows how to do this now. There's a good system now how to build a platform, how to build an ecosystem, and there are design workshops to a number of them. You know, that sort of like says we can scratch a blueprint for this, what we want to achieve, like you referred earlier in your question. So that is also beautiful and wonderful. Several offsites, hiring consulting firms, you know, like, and everybody gets excited of what is the possibilities of this ecosystem or some version of that. Here's the problem is, as you said, the problem is actually in the third stage, building the system, and how do you make it take off? That's why in the book I talk about how do you build that ecosystem? How do you engage participants, farmers? How do you get farmers even to share data? Farmers don't like to share data. They're very conservative. They're very particular about their farms. They're maybe not even, for many reasons, wouldn't want that. You know, so it's not Silicon Valley where you share your mobile phone data very quickly. So it's a big sort of a family matter in some ways. So that's how do you build that, and then how do you share out value? Here's the problem. And the reason why this don't take off, you know, I think that the statistic is on 3 studies that I just read, one from Boston Consulting Group, one from McKinsey, and one from Professors Kusumani and David Joffe at Harvard. And the three studies conclude that between 84%, one is 80% and one is 85% of all digital ecosystem and platforms that have been developed, of 85% fail or 84% fail. Only 15 really succeed. And the problem is that when they design the interaction field, and when they design those platforms and the architecture and the governance rules and the things, nobody thinks of the building it. Everybody thinks about it. Oh, this is how we can, you know, create value money, and this is how we capture more value, and this is how we create a subscription model here and there. It's another business model, and so forth. The idea of we need to get farmers, we need to design the architecture, the governance in a way so that we get farmers actually to share those data. They need to benefit. They need to see a tangible benefit in the improvement of the farm. And I think this is where it starts. And if you come from the mindset of, I'm going to hoard this data and I can sell more tractors, yeah, you're already lost with that. Mm-hmm. If you talk about serving farmers, so the first step when you build that nucleus, the first step for John Deere was, I'm going to have to give the data back to the farmer. And the farmer needs to see by comparing his farm to the neighborhood farm, or maybe a farm from Oklahoma compared in a similar weather condition a few weeks later to Kansas or to Oklahoma, to Nebraska, let's say. When farmers can learn from each other, then they say, look, I'm going to share this data. It's good for us, you know, good for me. It doesn't, you know, and so forth. That's how you get the interactions going in the nucleus. That's what you need to start with. Then when you create value there for farmers, from farmers, then you can sort of start working with an ecosystem, because then the data become valuable. And I think that I love so much, you captured the idea that what the typically approach is to have this grandiose idea. And they don't understand that you got to start, literally you start small. You got to start with a farmer. You know, Flatiron Health, if you notice, you know the story very well. The two gentlemen, Ted Turner and Zach Weinberg, the two had the hardest time in the world to get a single hospital to actually participate in that. They couldn't do it. They went through the university hospital at Wharton and said, like, look, guys, or Pennsylvania, UPenn, please, look, we've been graduating here a few years ago. Please give me a break. Let me do it. They could not get anybody convinced. And through some luck, they can tell you the story, they got the first hospital to participate, and the second, and the third. And now there are several thousands of them already. But it was an incredibly to crack that nut to the hospital university administrator, even a scientific university hospital, let's say at a university, that it's not about you, it's not about your operations, it's about figuring out how do we get a playing field or an interaction field where there is collaboration, participation, and interaction that then creates value for everyone.
So you talked about 4 steps. So
yeah.
framing, then designing the initial interaction field.
That's right.
But then building by starting small.
Yeah.
And then the 4th one would be?
It's sharing out. It's sharing out, value creation. So those are my 4 steps, because I think that the problem with ecosystems and as they have been built right now, they have an initial start and then they peter out. The biggest problem is that they don't have a runway. And in order, you need to think that 4th step is so important, because you need to say, how am I creating value? I give you a quick example that I just read 2 weeks ago. You know, it's been in the press that German car companies, which I love, by the way, some of them are my clients, so I will not say anything more. But German car companies actually have been lately, in the last couple of years, especially the premium luxury car companies, obsessed with the idea there is an innovation gap between Tesla and those companies. And they have developed workshop after workshops and hire consultants after consultants with the objective of how do we close the gap in battery? How do we close the gap in autonomous driving systems? How do we close the gap in electric? How do we close the gap in all of these things? Guess what happened just 2 weeks ago? Elon Musk says, by the way, I give away my technology. I give away my battery technology to you. I license it to the entire industry. And by the way, you can also have my autopilot, my proprietary. So the German, or maybe other, many engineers were flatgasted and consultants were running for the doors and say, like, where are my consulting fees? And the engineer says, my job is to close the gap. Now they're offering it for free. So, so sharing out value. So Elon Musk says, hey, if I share out battery technology or autonomous driving, if everybody uses the same autonomous driving solutions, then everybody accumulates mile on the same system, and the system becomes faster and saves more lives. Battery cost is the highest cost in a car, in an electric car. If everybody uses the same battery technologies, the cost of battery goes down, the cost of a car goes down, and everybody can afford a Tesla, not just that's just the deep pocket people, so, things like that. And so Elon Musk says, by sharing out value that I created, Tesla created, my so-called competitive advantage, I'm actually giving it away. But he also knows that he gives it away because everybody benefits. Because it's Tesla benefits because it becomes more an affordable car, and everybody and the society benefits because I think that we have 37,000 people die every year still in traffic accidents, and while Tesla is not going to eliminate, it's going up. Yeah, so it's 100 people a day. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah. Very interesting. So Tesla way ahead. And existing car companies very wedded to their own ideas. And one of the things I talk about a lot is, companies are born, at particular
Yeah.
moments in history, and they build, this whole set of routines and practices and processes. And what you're talking about is unraveling a lot of that, right?
Yeah.
So, how do established companies feel about that? You're telling them to do all these things that are just against common wisdom and strategy.
I think that in the I think that there's various approaches that companies are doing, and I think that look, if I'm start with a great car in the need fulfillment paradigm, everybody needs a car. You need a house, you need a car, you need a washing machine, and your business been built. It's natural that you think yourself as a car manufacturer, but I think. And that's good. And I think that, but the companies, established companies, are thinking now way beyond that. The problem is that action oftentimes doesn't follow the thinking. And if you look at car industries or the car industries, the traditional firms in many companies, is that in the car industry, a 55-year-old manager, most of the engineers in a car industry are mechanical engineers. They are 55 years old. They are driving 17 million or 15 million or 14 million cars. This is the car market these days. And they are responsible. They are on the top of their companies. And they say, I've been a mechanical engineer. And now they tell me I need to be an electrical engineer. Hell, how close am I to retirement? So what happens is, it's hard to make that shift, not because they mentally understand it, but you can't really follow that. So there is a transition happening in traditional companies. My suggestion is, the practice right now is to say, I run my legacy business like this, and then I create some speedboats or some startups. I drive a venture fund with electrical engineers, and we put some mechanical engineers to that, and some younger people, and we move them into a different site from our traditional headquarters and let them experiment. I think that's a recipe for failure. That's almost like an academic solution. That's my opinion. Again, there's a good thing to do in some ways, experimentation. I think that it's a good thing. But I think we all need to think that we need to start with that framing process. Tesla doesn't say we are a car company. Tesla says we are an energy company, or maybe beyond that even. We want to wean off the world of fossil fuel. And now when you frame your business like Tesla, then giving away the battery technology is a piece of cake, because that was not the point in the first place, right? So I think that my thinking is that you start to build. You can't run a legacy business and hope that some digital experiments will lead you to the solution. You have written in your work. I saw that HBR article, talking about Klöckner as an example, where the CEO Gisbert Rühl says, "I am the CEO of this company, and I'm transforming this entire company, a metal trader, from a legacy business of selling almost like commodity, many commodity like metal, if you were metal beams." And use this as an opportunity to transform. So I think that's what traditional companies need to do. They change their mindset, framing, what I call it, designing an interaction field for the entire company, not just for a separate division, and then start building it and engaging your existing customers. This is not capturing new customers. This is actually, that's why I call it the nucleus. Engaging, this is where you can start building it.
Well, one of the most interesting things to me about Klockner, which is the company that I wrote about in the article, you mentioned them in the book as well, is they did create a bit of separation between the mothership, the parent company, and the nucleus of the digital arm. But what I thought was so fascinating about them, and this perhaps is a lesson for those that want to take an existing company and do something with it. And I wonder if the other firms, like you mentioned, Lego, and you talked about Klockner, Deere, there's this profound respect between the digital, the digital, the ecosystem, the interaction arm, and the core, the people that were the mechanical engineer, the guy who's been at Volkswagen for 45 years or whatever it is. And I think a lot of times we don't treat that with much nuance in the world
Yeah.
of strategy. It's like, it's either, oh, we're all going to be hip and come to work in painter pants and sneakers at weird hours, or we're going to be, staid and
Yeah.
bold
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
whatever. And I think what Klockner's done is really interesting, saying, there's something to be learned from both of these models, and we need
Yes.
them working together in harmony. And
Yes.
and I mean, it wasn't perfect. I'm sure they had their odd messes, but I think that fundamental recognition that each party to this has something
Yeah.
to offer that often gets missed.
Yeah. Think about Klöckner. That is the world where they still you work fax and telephone. There is a trader that says like, look, and he scribbles down on a piece of paper the kind of prices he quotes on a particular metal beam. That's how they started. That's one. Number two, Klöckner is in Duisburg in Germany. Do you know Duisburg? That's coal country. This is like in the middle of nowhere. This is not Munich. This is not Frankfurt. This is not Hamburg. This is literally in the middle of nowhere. And Gisbert Riehl, the CEO, has figured out how to go to Berlin, where the startups are, but making sure that he brings along the core company. And Lego, 10 years ago, Lego didn't even have a Facebook page. 10 years ago.
I
10
didn't know
years
that.
ago. They were so far behind. They're in Billund. They're not in Copenhagen. They're in Denmark. They're in Billund, outside of nowhere. There is no other company in Billund except for Lego. The only hotel company is called Lego. Everything is Lego. Grocery store called Lego. Not quite, but but it's and out of that sort of like being in a with a commodity product, Lego blocks, for the God's sake, they are able to now Lego is the number one most engaged on YouTube channels, most engaged videos, just rated in July. So, and they're the most profitable toy company, more profitable than Mattel and Hasbro combined, and on and on and on. And that's a company that also was on the brink of bankruptcy when they took a different route. So it's sort of the interesting part is that there are these traditional companies, and you talk about John Deere, we talk about Klöckner, we talk about Lego. I think that's the exciting part. This is not about, I'm not talking about the typical fangers or the GAFAs, if about Google, Apple, and Facebooks. And they have made it happen. They created value. And here's maybe one thing that is so important that I think was also in your case study with Gisbert Riehl. They didn't really come up with a new technology. They didn't invent e-commerce. They didn't invent search. They didn't invent a new AI solution that everybody dreams about. They used some very low-cost, off-the-shelf solutions. And within 3 months, they used their own salespeople. They built that nucleus and made it work with their own customers first. And only once it worked there, in 3 months, they had an early success, and then they built it. Mm-hmm. So I think, that's a good theme, I think. And
it's very interesting. Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting about how Klockner started in particular is, you sent a fax and it sort of hit the boundary of the organization, and there was a set of activities that happened afterwards. Digitizing the fax meant a digital fax hits the boundary of the organization. What happens behind didn't change. Yeah. Right? And I think that's part of the sensitivity of doing this. I think a lot of times people that go after big changes have this enormous vision in mind. And the first thing they do is they create chaos. And then the organization very understandably says, this is chaotic. We can't have this. You can't have people willy-nilly deciding which beam to ship,
Yes.
So I think it's that tension between urgency, because you want to make this happen quickly. And Rule is a very impatient guy on many dimensions, but also, building carefully from the beginning.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness, we're nearly out of time. This has been fantastic. So listeners, readers, how can they learn more? Where should they go for more insight? Obviously, get the book. It's terrific. What else?
Yeah, of course. My company is Vivaldi Group, so it should be easy to be found on search. But my name, you can also try with my name. There are different versions. They all lead you to my name. That's right. And I think that there is a book to get you, also a few articles to get you inspired to start beginning. And then I'd be glad to share who works in this area, who can help on these things. But I think it's this is not anymore sort of a secret sauce that I'm trying to sort of like describe here. This is sort of something that is evolving. You have described it in your career, with the end of competition, with talking about arenas and thinking about in a new way of framing your competition in your business. So I think that these things are now available, that everyone can sort of like access this new way of thinking. So I hope you will buy the book. I think I earned $3 in New York. That doesn't pay me even a breakfast, but I'd be 2 books give me the
2 books get you breakfast. Okay, we'll have to do that.
Thank you.
And then when we can all meet in person again, I'm really looking forward to bumping into you on the Upper West Side, which is what Columbia is. Absolutely.
It's an intellectual collision, I guess, of some ideas.
That's great. Well, another thing, just in closing, that I think you're talking about, which is important and doesn't get talked about enough, is a value creating mindset around the organization. And I think what we're seeing all around us is a value extraction mindset. And in fact, I was with the Drucker Forum this morning, and people were asking me about Boeing, and some of the mishaps that they've had there. And I think if you approach this framing challenge as an exercise in value extraction, I think it just takes you to a very dark place. And so I'm encouraged to see a sort of emerging consensus that we need a really different way of looking at things.
I think so, but to that, like many of the early pioneers, that are now celebrated and have a lot of the typical names that are being talked about now in the stock exchange, they have been good at extracting value. And they use these new technologies and some of the things we talk about. But I think there is now this shifting of value creation. So I think that there's not everything. So I think that there is, anyway, that's another
fireside chat. Absolutely. But I think a good note to leave us on. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Erich, for being part of this. And I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation, however that happens.
Appreciate it.